Welcome to Module 4, Shaping the Budget. I'm Ben Sharofsky, Principal at Stepwell, and I will be walking you through the process we use to develop a budget. We will begin by discussing how to align the budget with the components of the grant, most notably, your work plan. We will then dive into various grant expenses with a highlight on subawards versus contractors. We will discuss what an indirect expense is, how to handle matching funds and program income, and some general considerations. After that, we'll talk about a budget narrative and what it takes to put one together. We'll finish with a demo where you'll learn how we develop a budget for Berry Good Farm. At the close of the module, you will have a good understanding of how to develop a budget and what to do next. Developing a budget can be technical and nuanced, so take your time and don't be afraid to ask for feedback from peers and the grant administrator. The most important thing you need to consider when developing your budget is asking yourself, are we requesting the right amount of resources for the work we are proposing? Organizations never want to be in a situation where they run out of grant dollars while they still have objectives to complete. To do this, we recommend having your work plan with you when you start working through the budget. Work line by line and ask yourself and your team, what will it take to accomplish this task? Do I need staff time, contractors, or supplies? Will partners do the work, or will we need direct funding? As you move through each task, you will start to get a sense of the overall budget. If the grant budget exceeds the grant maximum, you might have to go back and adjust your scope, scale back the project, or leverage outside funds. This is often an iterative process, so it may take a few rounds or a few conversations with the project team. As you move through the development process, you will need to consider 8 budget categories: personnel, fringe, travel, construction, equipment, supplies, contractual expenses, and other expenses. Depending on the grant, funding that goes to subawardees, who are your core partners executing key components of the project, might be included as contractual or other expenses. So let's jump in and learn what these terms mean. Let's start with personnel. Personnel covers the internal costs of your lead applicant, not all partners working on the grant. Generally, you can estimate time hourly or as a percentage of a full-time workload. For example, Thistle might work on a project for 10 hours a week at $40 an hour, or they might contribute 10% of their time over a year at an annual salary of $60,000. Most grants will want you to show your work for how you came up with those numbers. Remember, this does not include any costs associated with benefits, payroll, or overhead. We will capture those elsewhere. Finally, some grants might ask you to differentiate between key personnel versus other personnel. When they do that, they usually want more information about the key personnel and more details about their expenses. Other personnel can often be lumped together. Follow the grant guidance when you see this. Fringe is all the organizational expenses you incur as a result of your staff working for you on the project. Fringe will include payroll taxes, insurance, retirement, and other benefits you might be providing. During a grant period, you may need to calculate this rate per person, but for the grant application, you can use an organizational-wide fringe rate. Add up the cost of providing all of these services to your staff, and then divide it by the total compensation you pay in the form of salary. The resulting percentage is your fringe rate. To add fringe costs to your grant budget, take the rate and multiply it by the staff costs included in personnel. For example, if the staff cost associated with Thorn working on the project is $100,000, over the course of the grant, and their fringe rate is 20%, then $20,000 could be billed to the grant as a fringe expense. The next category is travel, which includes any travel required to complete the grant. This includes local travel or out of state. Mileage should be calculated using the federal mileage rate at the time of the application. A simple Google search will help you identify the current rate. For overnight trips, make sure to estimate each component of the trip, which could include flights, taxis or Ubers, hotels, or travel per diems for food. When including per diems, you will need to identify the federal rate, which can be found on the GSA website. Next up, we will talk about equipment and supplies. As of 2025, the USDA generally defines equipment as items above $10,000 in a federal grant. This threshold was increased from $5,000 in 2024. This might include tractor implements, a vehicle, processing equipment, or something else that you need to deliver your project. Supplies are those below that threshold, even if you would consider it a piece of equipment internally. This is calculated as per unit, not based on the total cost. For example, a computer that is needed specifically for a grant might cost $2,000. This would be a supply. If you need to buy 6 of them for a total of $12,000, those would still be considered supplies, even though the total price is above the threshold. Be careful in your budget about how many individual line items you include, as they can create administrative headaches over time. Note that we are not covering construction, as construction can be complex and is often unallowable in USDA grants. Contractors and subawards are closely related. While subawards are usually not their own category, they will either slot in under contractors or other expense. It's important to note that they do have their own requirements and considerations. Contractors are those you are hiring to do a task, where subawards, subrecipients, or subgrantees are your partners who are working with you closely to execute a key aspect of the grant. One of the ways we think about the difference between the two is that if I could choose between multiple firms, such as for marketing or social media support, without much changing in the actual work, that line item is usually contractual. When a partner is integral to a task or objective, they are likely a subawardee. When procuring contractors, whether before a grant application or after, you need to be prepared to comply with the federal procurement rules. The two numbers to remember here are $10,000 and $250,000. If a contractor is below $10,000, this micro purchase can generally be sole sourced. In between the two, you must get quotes from multiple firms. And above $250,000, you must have a formal and open RFP process. While you can name subawardees in your application without a procurement process, it is important to note that these partners will have to comply with the same federal requirements as the main grantee, tracking expenses and costs by individual budget category. The final category is other expenses. This category is the catch-all for items that don't fit cleanly into the others. Let's say you are renting space or providing a stipend to participants in a training program. These expenses are usually considered other expenses. Now that we understand the direct expenses, let's talk about indirect. The easy way to think about indirect is that it is the organizational overhead. The USDA allows you to charge for costs that cannot be directly attributed to a single project, such as office space or insurance. In these situations, you calculate indirect based on the modified total direct cost. This is a special formula that takes into account only a portion of the subawards while excluding equipment and most items under other expenses. With most grantees, you are able to charge a 15% de minimis indirect rate for your indirect based on the total modified direct costs. We will walk through this in the demo. Let's talk about match next. Matching funds are the portion of the project work that you and your project partners are responsible for covering. This is sometimes called cost share as well. Some grants require no match, while some require significant match in excess of what the grant is providing. Always refer to the Notice of Funding Opportunities to double check. There are generally two ways match is described in NOFOs, and it can be confusing. Sometimes it is described as the percentage of the total award. For example, if a NOFO says the federal government will only fund 30% of the total project costs, your match is then considered 70%. Alternatively, match is sometimes described as a percentage of the federal contribution. For example, a grant might say that you are required to provide 25% match where federal funds cannot exceed $1 million. In this scenario, you are required to demonstrate at least $250,000 in match if you are asking for $1 million. Always make sure you understand which of these match structures a grant is asking for, as not properly meeting your match requirements is one of the most common ways grants are rejected. So how do you cover your match? There are two types of match you can provide: in-kind or cash. Cash match is when you and your partners directly pay for activities that support the grant. For example, you hire a contractor to do a study and pay for it out of organizational funds. Alternatively, you may use in-kind contributions. These in-kind contributions are donations of time or resources in support of the grant, rather than a cash exchange. For example, the lead organization might donate 20% of their executive director's time to a grant. The time has a value which can be counted as a match. Most grants require you to submit match commitment letters, so you need to have match figured out at the time of application. In addition, federal grants generally cannot be used to match other federal grants, and you cannot use a single dollar of match across multiple federal grants. Once it is used once, it is spoken for. The other confusing thing you will see in most grant opportunities is program income. Program income is the revenue generated as a result of the grant. For example, if you sell tickets to a conference that was funded in part by a grant, the revenue from those tickets is considered program income. Program income is estimated at the time of application and tracked during the grant period. The USDA wants to see that your program income is reinvested in the project purpose. Great. Now let's move on to the budget narrative. You might be asking, what on earth is a budget narrative? Most grants will require you to fill out a table or chart describing your grant budget. They might also ask you for a budget narrative, which is exactly what it sounds like. In text form, you will be asked to describe the individual costs, how they were calculated, and what they will be used for. For example, under personnel, we might say, as project director, Thistle is spending 50% of their time on the grant in year 1 at an annual salary of $100,000. As such, the total grant request is $50,000. They will manage all aspects of the work plan and work with contractors and partners to achieve outcomes 1 through 3. With equipment, contractors, and construction, you will want to provide an explanation of how the costs were calculated, such as a quote. So now we are ready to jump in with our demo. Before we do, let's review what we learned through the module today. We walked through aligning the grant with our work plan and the budget categories. We learned how to identify matching sources and manage program income. Finally, we walked through the basic elements of a budget narrative. As we walk through the demo in part 2 of this module, be sure to take a look at the budget template and the modified total direct cost calculator that we provided. Thanks and happy learning!